So our application we're doing is going to be taking our contacts and mapping them on the screen. And we'll also be able to use geolocation to find our current position and show the contacts near our current position. So we'll start the application as we do any RowHub or roads application. We will use the rowgen command. We'll call this contact. So that generates our application. Now we're going to add our model for our customers. And our customer has attributes like a first, last names, email, phone, address, city, state, and zip code, and most importantly, a lat and a long of our customer location. So now that that's been created, let's go ahead and open up our application. Let's see here. At this point, it's still just a basic roads application. We'll take a look at our model here we created. Our customer model. Here is our show page. So when you select a customer, you open this page, and we've generated our lat and long. So let's go ahead and launch this application and see how it looks already. So we'll just run iPhone. So this is going to do our iPhone build and launch it to our simulator, as you've seen before in the previous webinars. Since I've just created the application today, just installed the latest roads gem, it's going to take a minute here to do the first compilation. So we can go ahead and see our application here. Actually, I forgot to change the index page, so let's go ahead and do that now. We'll reset that. And we'll go back to our TextMate here, change our index, and change this to our customer. Save that, and we'll go ahead and relaunch. This time it runs much faster since we've already did the build process. Open our application. We have our customers. So everything seems to be working good. When we create a customer, it has lat and long here as well. So we'll go ahead and cancel that and go back to our application since we're going to be adding mapping here. But the first thing we need to do is to set up for synchronization. Since we're going to be using a backend and our backend has the latitude and longitudes of our clients, we will set up this model to sync. So we have to enable sync in our model, and we need to set in our rowconfig.txt the location of our sync server. So we'll go ahead and paste that in here. And since we're going to be testing on Android as well, you need to put the real IP address of your machine. So that's ready to go for syncing with our backend. So let's go ahead and relaunch our application and sync to make sure we're getting all of our data correctly and we're getting what we expect. The backend we're using is our customer row store backend, which is available on our GitHub page as our example. So if we take a look, we have 4 customers here. So we can select a customer, first name, last name, email, zip, and it's showing our latitude and longitude. That's great, but we don't want to show, present an application that has a latitude and longitude. We want to present that with a map. So we're going to go ahead and change our show page to have a link to a map instead of displaying the latitude and longitude. So let's open up our TextMate again, and we'll go to our show view. So you can see all of the fields that are created when we used Rogin. By default, it just creates a field for every attribute that you've provided. So here's latitude and longitude, so we'll go ahead and remove those. And in their place, we'll put a link. So we'll add another list item here in the list at the end. And we'll make a link here. And we'll do a new action, and we'll call that action map it. So we'll just say action will be map it. And then we'll pass that the ID of our customer so it knows what our customer is. So we'll give it our customer object, and then close that here. Inside this, we'll give it a name here. We'll call this show on map. So this is what our link is going to have. And we'll give it another span here to give it the disclosure arrow to indicate to our users that this is going to be a link. And then go ahead and close our tag. So now that we have a link, we need to go and implement this action map it. And this action is going to be the action that actually displays our map. We're also missing a close list item here too. So we'll add that in as well. So we'll go back to our page here. And we will go ahead and add a map it function. So to start this, I'm going to go to our roads wiki, and there's some example code for the map view here already. So we're just going to start with this example code in our application. So we'll go ahead and copy this and put it into our application because it gives us a good starting point of how to use the map view. For our annotations, we're only going to need one annotation. So we're going to go ahead and remove the extra stuff here. And we'll format this a little nicer so we can see what we're doing. So this will be our annotation for this map. And so remember, this is going to be the map view of just one customer. So we passed in the ID, so we need to get our customer. So we'll use ROM here and customer.find. So now we'll get our customer and our customer object. So in your app view, there's two parameters that are passed. There's settings and annotation. The settings is basically global settings and configuration for your map, such as map type, which can be hybrid, satellite, etc. Region specifies where the map is centered. You pass in a latitude, a longitude, and how large you want the map to be in degrees. So we have 0.2, 0.2 for our size. The latitude and longitude we want to have to be our customer's latitude and longitude. So we'll say customer.lat and customer.long. Do we want to be able to zoom? Yes or no? So we want the user to be able to zoom. We want them to be able to scroll. But we don't want to use the default show user location. We're going to add a special annotation there for that user. And the API is your Google Maps API key. So when you go to deploy your application directly to a device, you need to have a valid API key. If you're using it from the simulator, you don't need a valid API key, and you can just leave it as the default here. For our annotations, it takes an array that you can pass a latitude, longitude, title, subtitle, and there's also another one that you can pass, which is URL. And on the iPhone, this URL is what happens when you click on that. So we're going to give it the link to our customer here, so that when the user clicks on this, it will take them to that customer. And we also need to change this to have our customer.lat customer.long. So once we have that all set up, calling mapView.create with the parameters is what actually calls and displays that map. But one thing we need to do is to tell it what needs to happen after the map has been closed. So we need to either render a page or we need to redirect a page. So we're just going to go ahead and redirect back to the index when they close this map. If they haven't clicked on somebody, we'll do that. So let me go ahead and do that here. Redirect, action, index. So we'll save this. So we'll just verify here that everything we have is correct. We have our mapIt method that will go to our index. In our show, we now have a URL that links to our mapIt function. So let's go ahead and run this application. We're still logged in, so we should have our customer list. So we'll go ahead and we'll open a customer. We can see this customer has all the information, but now at the bottom has a link that we created called Show on Map. So we'll select that, and it opens up our map. And you can see it has a pin, so if we select this pin, it shows current location, which is what we had there. And if we select that, it takes us back to that user. As I showed, you have to have a redirect or a render if somebody closes the map. So if we show on map and then just close the map, you can see it takes us back to our index page, which is what we had defined here in our action. So one thing we can do here to add a little bit more customization here is for our title we can actually give it the user's name. So let's do that now. So we'll have customer.first and customer.last. We'll give it a subtitle. Let's call it go to user or go to customer. Save that and relaunch our application, and then we'll see the results here. Go back to our customer list. We'll select a customer here. Show on the map. Now our pin has Brian and go to customer, which is the changes that we made, and the functionality is the same. So that's how you do the basic map settings and how to integrate a map into your application. With the annotations, there's a couple of different formats you can use, but if you go to our Map View Roads page, it describes all of the settings and all of the annotation settings that you can put. It also shows a link on how you can get your API key for the Google Maps. So that's basically how you use Map View. So we'll take a minute here for any questions and continue on in a couple minutes. Okay, so Jeff here is asking, I use run iPhone for iPhone. What would I use? Rake run Android for Android? The answer is yes. So let's demonstrate this mapping on Android. Now the difference for Android, to add mapping, you need to do some configuration in your build.yaml. Because the way the iPhone works, you don't need an API key or anything to work. So what we're going to need to do here is change our build YAML, because Android requires you to have an API key tied to your signing key. So let me go ahead and open up my application. We'll go to my build YAML, and to do this we're going to add a section here called Android. So I'm just going to copy and paste what I had before. So we have three settings here. Android version 2.1, which means what simulator do I want to use when I run my application. By default it uses the 1.5 simulator. The mapping true says we want to enable mapping for our application, and our API key is our Google Maps API key. This API key is tied with my developer certificate, so when I run using debug mode, it will be tied in and worked. So we'll go ahead, save this file, and we'll do a rake run Android. So the question here is, why did mapit have to use find to get the customer, since the customer object was already passed as a parameter? So customer.object actually gets you the ID, the internal ID of the object, not the object itself. Because it's using calls to it, we just want to pass the ID and pull it out of the ROM database, as that's a little bit faster. And we also wanted to have access to the first name, last name, and all the customer information when we're going to be doing our mapping. We could have done passing in latitude and longitude in the URL directly and use that as parameters. For me, it just is a little bit cleaner if you pass the ID and pull out the ID. So our Android emulator here is coming up, and the experience we're going to have, since we've set up our build YAML and set up our mapping already, that when we run this application, we should have the same as we saw on iPhone. So in a moment here, Android emulator is starting up. And we wait for our success message, so it says loading is complete. So we'll go ahead and run our contact application. So we'll go ahead and take a look at our customer list. It has my old data because I've synced it on my emulator once before. So we'll take a look at Brian here. Scroll down to the bottom and we have our Show on Map link. So if we select our Show on Map, it brings up our map on Android. Now it doesn't have the annotations that we have on iPhone. However, we are working on that and we'll have that fixed. But if we select our pin here, we can see it loads our users page, just as it did on iPhone. So the question is, how would I look up and display contacts near my current location? So the second part of our webinar today is on the geolocation and how to use the geolocation features in roads. So let's continue on with that. We'll go ahead and go back to our editor here. So what we want to do is map everybody from our current location. So we'll go ahead back to our controller here. Let me go back to our controller. Actually, first let's not do it from controller. Let's go to our index page. So what we want to do on our index page is have a link. And that link we want to have at the top to say, show all of my customers, and it'll show it centered on my location. So we'll add our link here. We'll use the URL for helper to build our URL. And we'll call this one map all. And so in this we'll have our span here as well as we did before. Have an extra quote in here. There we go. Class equals title. And then we'll call this map all. We'll have another span here. And give that the disclosure indicator. Close the A tag. Close our link tag. So now we'll have an action that goes to one called map all. So we'll go back to our controller and now implement this map all method. So we know we want to do all customers, so let's map all. So we'll say our customers will be customer find all. So actually, I'm getting ahead of myself here. One thing that you need to realize about the geolocation is that sometimes you don't have a fix on the current location. So if we take a look here in our device capabilities on our roads page, we'll select our GPS. So it says here for roads 2.0, your application must have GPS capability enabled. To do that, you add capabilities GPS into your build YAML. So we'll do that here real quick to make sure we have our GPS enabled. So we have GPS enabled. Let's go back here. So for our geolocation class, we have latitude, longitude, known position, and set notification. A set notification is only called once when your application's position has changed. And so what we need to do is, before we're going to map everybody and get our geolocation to do that, we need to know if we have the current location that the device is at using the GPS. So the first thing we're going to do is check if the position is known. And if not, we're going to fire off a callback so we can display a waiting page until that is done. So the first thing we need to do here is check our geolocation here. So if we don't know the position, we're going to add the callback here. Location set notification. And then we'll use our URL for helper again. Action, and we'll call this the geo callback. If we need to pass any additional parameters, and the default timeout. And then we'll redirect them to our wait page. So what this does is, if the geolocation is not known, it calls set notification, which then waits for a known position, and it will display the wait page until then. So we need to implement two things here. We need to implement our geolocation callback function, and we also need to implement our wait page. So the wait page is pretty simple. We're just going to create a new view. There's not going to be any controller logic on it. So we'll just make a new file called wait.erb. Create that. And I'm going to put a simple page here that all it has is a title with wait. There's no toolbar buttons, and it just says, please wait while we determine your location. In our geo callback, we'll go ahead and create this function now. In our geo callback, what we need to do is to navigate to our map all page again if we have the known position. So we're going to go ahead and do a web view.navigate, and we'll give it URL 4 again. Action, let's back to map all. But we'll only do it if the parameters passed in known position. Oops. It's not equal 0. And let's see, params status equals OK. So what happens is if we get the callback, the parameter known position and status are passed in, and so we check that if that is okay, then we'll navigate to our map all function. You can also check if the status has an error or a failure and redirect based on that, but for now we're just going to redirect if it works because it always works here. So back to our map all function.